She had no wolf, no future, no worth. In a world ruled by fangs and bloodlines, Elara Voss was nothing until the night she sang for a monster and changed everything. This is the story of the girl who didn't belong, and how she became the queen who rewrote the rules. Stay until the end to see how a broken curse, a brutal choice, and one impossible love turned the weakest outcast into the kingdom's greatest force. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments, hit that like button, and let's dive into a story you won't forget. Elara Voss learned early that silence was survival. She was 12 the first time her brother called her broken. 14 when her mother stopped looking her in the eye. 16 when her father, the Pax Beta, told her outright she was a liability, a stain on the family name that no amount of strategy or politeness could wash away. She had no wolf. In the Ashwood pack, that meant she had no future. The pack lived in the shadow of the Frost Peak Mountains, a brutal, unforgiving stretch of wilderness where only the strong survived. Wolves were everything here. They were power, they were status, they were identity. A wolfless child wasn't just weak, they were worthless. And Elara's family, one of the pack's oldest and most respected bloodlines, had produced exactly one, her. Her older brother Garrett had shifted at 13, a massive gray wolf with silver-tipped ears and a howl that could rattle windows. He was strong, fast, brutal in the sparring ring. Everyone said he'd be beta one day, maybe even challenge for alpha if he played it right. Her younger sister Mira shifted at 11, smaller but graceful and quick, with a rust-colored coat and sharp green eyes. Even at 15, she was already being courted by promising young wolves from neighboring packs. And then there was Elara. 22 years old, still human, still nothing. She lived in the east wing of the family estate, a sprawling stone manor that sat at the edge of the pack's central territory. Her room was tucked away in a corner, far from the main halls where her father held court and her brother entertained guests. It was a small space, but she'd made it hers. Shelves crammed with books, a battered guitar propped against the wall, sheets of handwritten songs scattered across a wooden desk. The window overlooked the forest, and on clear nights she could hear the pack running, howls rising and falling like a symphony she'd never be part of. She didn't hate them for it. Not really. She understood. In a world where survival depended on strength, she was a gap in the armor, a weak link, a risk. Her father had tried, at first, to find her a place. He'd suggested she work in the archives, cataloging pack records. She'd done it for a year before Garrett complained that it looked bad to have her so visible. Then her father suggested she help in the kitchens. She'd lasted 3 months before the head cook, gently, apologetically, asked her to stop coming. The other wolves didn't like it. It made them uncomfortable. So she stopped trying. She stayed in her room. She read. She wrote songs no one would ever hear. She taught herself to play guitar by watching old videos on a salvaged laptop. And every few weeks, when the loneliness got too heavy, she'd slip out at dawn and walk to the cliffs overlooking the valley, where she could sing without anyone hearing. Her voice was the one thing she had that felt like hers. It wasn't trained, it wasn't polished, but it was real, raw and aching and honest in a way nothing else in her life could be. When she sang, she didn't have to be the disappointment. She didn't have to be the mistake. She could just be. But even that, she kept hidden. Because in the Ashwood pack, beauty without power was just another kind of weakness. The morning everything changed started like any other. Elara woke to frost on her window and silence in the house. She dressed quickly, worn jeans, a faded sweater, boots that had seen better days, and slipped downstairs before anyone else was awake. The kitchen was empty, the stone floors cold beneath her feet. She made tea, wrapped her hands around the mug for warmth, and stood by the window watching the sun rise over the mountains. She'd learned to love these quiet hours. The world felt softer before the pack woke up, less sharp, less cruel. But today the quiet didn't last. She heard her father's voice first, low and tense, coming from his study down the hall. Then Garrett's, louder, more animated. Then her mother's, sharp and anxious. Something was happening. Elara set down her mug and moved closer, pressing herself against the wall near the study door. She knew better than to walk in uninvited, but she'd also learned that information was currency in this house. The more she knew, the better she could stay out of the way. 3 weeks, her father was saying. That's all the notice they gave us. 3 weeks to prepare for the Alpha King. Her mother's voice was tight. This is a disaster, Marcus. We're not ready. The pack's not ready. We lost the northern border skirmish last month. We're down 2 hunters and I know. Her father sounded exhausted. I know all of that, Elena, but it doesn't matter. He's coming. And if we don't impress him, we're done. What does that mean? Garrett asked. Done how? It means, her father said slowly, that he has the authority to dissolve packs that aren't performing, redistribute the territory, absorb the wolves into stronger packs, or exile them entirely. Silence. He wouldn't, her mother whispered. He's done it before. Twice. Once to the Blackwater pack in the south, once to the Silver Pine pack near the coast. Both times the Alphas tried to argue. Both times he didn't even hesitate. Her father paused. Darien Thorne doesn't make empty threats. If he decides we're weak, we're finished. Elara's stomach turned. She'd heard of the Alpha King, of course. Everyone had. Darien Thorne was a legend, ruthless, unstoppable, feared across every pack in the kingdom. He'd taken the throne at 19 after killing his own father in a challenge so brutal that witnesses still refused to speak about it. In the 10 years since, he'd crushed every rebellion, ended every dispute, and ruled with an iron fist that left no room for weakness. And now he was coming here, to judge them, to judge her family. We'll host a feast, her mother said, her voice steadying. A proper one. We'll show him our best fighters, our strongest wolves. We'll prove we're still viable. And what about her? Garrett's voice was cold. Elara's breath caught. What about her? Her father asked. Elara, the wolfless one. You know he's going to ask about her. Everyone does. It's the first thing other packs bring up when they talk about us. Garrett's tone was sharp. We can't hide her. Not from him. We'll keep her out of sight, her mother said quickly. She'll stay in her room during the visit. He doesn't need to know. He'll know. Garrett cut her off. He's the Alpha King. He knows everything. And when he finds out we've been hiding a wolfless daughter, it's going to look worse than just admitting it up front. Then what do you suggest? Her father snapped. I suggest, Garrett said slowly, that we stop pretending she's part of this family. The silence that followed was suffocating. Elara pressed her hand over her mouth, her chest tight. Garrett, her mother said quietly, she's your sister. She's a liability. His voice didn't waver. And if we're going to survive this, we need to cut our losses. Enough. Her father's voice was hard. We're not discussing this now. Focus on the feast. We'll deal with Elara when the time comes. Elara didn't wait to hear more. She turned and walked back to her room, her legs shaking, her mind spinning. Cut our losses. That's what she was to them. A loss. The next 3 weeks were chaos. The entire pack mobilized. Hunters brought in game for the feast. Builders repaired the Great Hall. Fighters trained harder, faster, pushing themselves to look strong and capable. Elara watched it all from her window, invisible as always. Mira came to visit once, bubbling with excitement about the Alpha King's arrival. They say he's incredible, Mira said, sprawled across Elara's bed. Huge, dangerous, gorgeous. Can you imagine? Not really, Elara said, not looking up from her notebook. I'm going to shift for him, Mira continued, ignoring her. Show him what I can do. Maybe he'll notice me. Mira, he's not here to find a mate. You don't know that? Mira grinned. Maybe he's tired of being alone. Maybe he wants someone strong, someone worthy. Someone with a wolf, Elara said quietly. Mira's smile faltered. Elara, it's fine. Elara closed her notebook. I'm just saying, don't get your hopes up. He's the Alpha King. He's not going to look twice at any of us. Mira was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, Father told you to stay in your room during the feast, didn't he? Elara didn't answer. I'm sorry, Mira said. Don't be. Elara forced a smile. I'm used to it. But she wasn't. She never was. The Alpha King arrived on a cold, gray morning. Elara heard the commotion from her room, shouts, the sound of horses, the low rumble of engines. She moved to her window and looked down. The courtyard was full of wolves, her pack, all gathered to greet him. And at the center of it all, stepping out of a sleek black vehicle, was Darian Thorne. Even from a distance, he was overwhelming. He was tall, taller than any wolf she'd ever seen, with broad shoulders and a presence that seemed to fill the entire space. His hair was dark, almost black, and his face was hard and sharp, all angles and cold authority. He wore black from head to toe, and when he moved, the crowd parted like water. Her father rushed forward, all smiles and deference, extending a hand. Darian didn't take it. He just looked at him, and her father's smile died. Elara's stomach twisted. This was going to be bad. The feast was held that night. Elara stayed in her room, as instructed, and tried not to listen, but it was impossible. The great hall was directly beneath her, and sound traveled easily through the old stone. She could hear everything, her father's booming voice as he welcomed the king, Garrett's cocky laughter as he tried to make an impression, Mira's bright, flirtatious tone as she spoke to someone near the head table, and beneath it all, cutting through every other sound, was Darian Thorne's voice. Deep, cold, absolute. Every time he spoke, the room went quiet. Elara sat on her bed, her guitar in her lap, and tried to distract herself. She played a few chords, hummed a melody, stopped. She couldn't focus. Her mind kept drifting back to the conversation she'd overheard weeks ago. Cut our losses. She wondered if her father had already decided. If tonight, while she sat up here alone, he was downstairs explaining to the Alpha King why his wolfless daughter didn't matter. She wondered if Darian Thorne would even care. The knock came just after midnight. Elara was half asleep, curled up under a blanket, when she heard it. 3 sharp raps on her door. She sat up, confused. What? The door opened. Garrett stood there, dressed in his formal clothes, his face tight with irritation. Get up, he said. Elara blinked. What? Get up, get dressed. You're coming downstairs. Her heart sank. Why? Because father said so. Garrett stepped into the room. The king wants entertainment. Father's scrambling. He asked for you. Me? Elara's voice cracked. Why would he? I don't know, and I don't care. Garrett crossed the room and grabbed her wrist, hauling her to her feet. Just get dressed and come downstairs. Now. Garrett, I can't. You don't have a choice. His grip tightened. Father's losing his mind down there. The king's bored, and if we don't give him something worth watching, this whole night's a disaster, so move. Elara tried to pull away. What does he want me to do? Garrett's expression shifted. Just for a second, something almost like guilt flickered across his face. Then it was gone. You'll find out, he said, and dragged her toward the door. The corridors were dark and cold. Garrett pulled her through the servants' passage that ran along the back of the great hall, his grip bruising her wrist. She stumbled after him, her mind racing. This didn't make sense. The Alpha King didn't know she existed. He had no reason to ask for her, unless her father had told him, unless this was part of the plan. Garrett, she said, her voice shaking, what's happening? Just stay quiet, he muttered. Don't make this worse. Worse? She yanked her arm, but he didn't let go. What are you talking about? He didn't answer. They reached a side door, and Garrett shoved her toward it. Wait here. Don't move. Don't speak. Don't do anything unless someone tells you to. Garrett, please. But he was already gone, slipping back into the noise and light of the great hall. Elara stood there, alone in the dim corridor, her pulse hammering in her ears. This was a trap. She could feel it. But before she could run, the door swung open, and her father appeared. He looked frantic, his face flushed, his collar askew, sweat beading on his forehead. Elara, he said, breathless. Good. You're here. Father, what's going on? Listen to me. He gripped her shoulders, his fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. The king is bored. The feast isn't enough. He asked for something more. A performance, something memorable. Elara's stomach dropped. No. It's already decided. No. Father, you can't. You're going to sing. The world tilted. I'm not. You have a voice. You've been hiding it for years, but I know. I've heard you. His eyes were wild. The king wants entertainment. You'll give it to him. I can't. You'll sing the moon song. Everything stopped. The moon song. It was sacred, ancient, sung only at mate bond ceremonies by wolves pledging their lives to one another. It was a song of power, of devotion, of eternal connection between mates. It was never, ever sung by someone without a wolf. "You can't make me do this," Elara whispered. Her father's expression hardened. "I'm not making you do anything. I'm giving you a choice." "What choice?" "You sing," he said slowly, "or you leave. Tonight. For good." Her breath caught. "You've been a burden long enough, Elara." His voice was quiet now, almost gentle. "I've tried. I've given you chances. But you're not a child anymore, and this pack can't afford dead weight. So decide, sing for the king, or pack your things and go. Either way, this ends tonight." Tears burned in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She looked at her father, this man who was supposed to protect her, supposed to love her, and saw nothing but cold calculation. He didn't care about her. He never had. She was just a piece on a board, and tonight he was sacrificing her to save himself. "Fine," she said, her voice steady. "I'll sing." Bantam. She walked into the great hall with her head down and her fists clenched. The moment she appeared, the room fell silent. Every eye turned toward her, sharp, curious, mocking. She didn't look up. She didn't dare. Her father's voice rang out, smooth and confident, like he hadn't just threatened to throw her out into the wilderness. "My king, if it pleases you, my daughter will perform the moon song." A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Someone muttered, "The wolfless one?" Someone else snickered. "This should be good." Elara's face burned. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. She wanted to disappear. But then, from the head of the table, a voice cut through the noise. "Let her sing." It was him, Darien Thorne, the Alpha King. The room went dead silent. Elara looked up, and for the first time, she saw him. He was exactly what Mira had said. Enormous, dark-haired, sharp-featured, with eyes like winter steel. He sat at the center of the table, utterly still, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't frowning. He was just watching, waiting. Her father gestured toward the center of the hall. "Go on, Elara." She forced her legs to move. Every step felt like walking through water. The wolves watched her, some amused, some confused, some openly disgusted. She reached the center of the hall and stopped, her hands shaking. She had no accompaniment, no music, no wolf to give her strength, just her voice, and a room full of people who wanted her to fail. She closed her eyes, and she sang. The moon song was meant to be sung with power, with certainty, with the full force of a wolf's soul behind it, the bond between mates resonating through every note. Elara had none of that, but she had something else. She had pain. She had loneliness. She had 22 years of silence and rejection and longing for something she'd never have. So she didn't try to sound strong. She didn't try to sound perfect. She just let it all pour out. The song was old, the words half forgotten by most of the pack, but she knew them by heart. She'd found them in a dusty book in the archives years ago and memorized them, even though she'd never thought she'd sing them aloud. She sang about connection, about two souls finding each other in the dark, about love that transcended form and time and distance. She sang about longing, for touch, for understanding, for someone to see you as you truly were and not turn away. She sang about loss, the ache of knowing you'd never have what everyone else took for granted. Her voice cracked on the high notes. It wavered on the low ones. It wasn't polished or trained or beautiful in any conventional sense, but it was real. And when the last note faded into silence, the hall didn't erupt in applause or laughter. It just stopped. No one moved. No one spoke. Elara opened her eyes, her chest heaving, her hands trembling, and found every wolf in the room staring at her. Not with mockery, not with pity, with shock. Her father looked pale. Garrett's jaw was tight. Mira's eyes were wide. But none of them mattered, because Darien Thorne was standing. He rose slowly, his chair scraping against the stone floor, and the sound was deafening in the silence. He was massive, taller than she'd realized, broader. His presence filled the room like a storm, and when he moved, the crowd parted without a word. He walked toward her, slow, deliberate. His eyes never left hers. Elara's heart slammed against her ribs. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. He stopped in front of her. Up close, he was even more overwhelming. His face was hard, all sharp lines and cold authority, but his eyes, those winter steel eyes, were looking at her like he was seeing something no one else could. The hall held its breath, and then he spoke. His voice was low, rough, meant only for her. "What's your name?" She swallowed. "Elara. Elara." He repeated it slowly, like he was tasting the sound. Then, louder, addressing the room, "She's coming with me." The hall exploded. Her father stepped forward, sputtering, "My king, she's what?" Darian didn't even look at him. His gaze stayed locked on Elara. "Wolfless? I can see that. And yet she just sang the moon song better than any wolf I've ever heard." He turned finally to face her father. "Tell me, Beta Marcus, why was she hidden from me?" Her father paled. She's not pack material, my king. She has no wolf, no value. You didn't think, Darian repeated, his voice dropping to something dangerous. You had something unique, something rare, and you buried it because it didn't fit your idea of strength. My king, Enough. Darian's tone left no room for argument. He looked back at Elara. "Do you want to stay here?" She stared at him. No one had ever asked her that. No one had ever asked her what she wanted. Her voice was barely a whisper. "No." "Then pack your things. You leave with me at dawn." "My king," her father tried again. "Are you arguing with me, Beta?" Darian's eyes were cold. "Because if you are, I'll be happy to settle this another way." Her father went silent. Darian turned back to Elara, and for just a second, something shifted in his expression, something almost soft. "Go," he said quietly. "Pack. I'll wait." Elara moved through the next hour in a daze. She went back to her room, threw clothes into a bag, grabbed her guitar and her notebooks. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely tie the straps. She was leaving. She was actually leaving. She didn't know where she was going, didn't know what the Alpha King wanted with her, didn't know if this was salvation or a different kind of trap. But she didn't care. Anything was better than staying here. Mira appeared in the doorway just as she was finishing. "Elara," she said, her voice small. Elara didn't look at her. "What?" "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For..." Mira hesitated. "For suggesting the song. I thought it would be funny. I didn't think..." "You didn't think I'd actually be able to sing it?" Elara shouldered her bag. "I know. That's not... Yes, it is." Elara finally looked at her. "You wanted to humiliate me, just like Garrett, just like Father. You wanted the Alpha King to see how pathetic I was, so he'd... What? Laugh? Agree that I'm worthless?" Mira's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean... It doesn't matter." Elara walked past her. "I'm done. Where are you going?" "I don't know." Elara paused at the door. "But anywhere's better than here." Darian was waiting in the courtyard when she came down. The sky was starting to lighten, dawn creeping over the mountains. His guards were loading supplies into vehicles, preparing to leave. He saw her and nodded. "Ready?" he asked. "Yes." He studied her for a moment, then gestured to one of the vehicles. "Get in." She did. As the convoy pulled away, Elara looked back at the estate, at the house where she'd spent 22 years feeling like a ghost. She didn't feel sad. She felt free, and when Darian Thorne glanced at her from the front seat, his expression unreadable, she met his gaze and didn't look away. Whatever came next, she'd face it, because for the first time in her life, someone had seen her, really seen her, and she wasn't going to waste it. The drive to the capital took 2 days. Elara spent most of it staring out the window, watching the landscape change from rugged mountains to dense forest to sprawling plains. She'd never been this far from home. She'd never been anywhere, really. Her entire life had been contained within the Ashwood Pack's territory, a few square miles of forest and stone that had felt like a prison. Now sitting in the back of a sleek black vehicle with tinted windows, she felt untethered, free, but also terrified. Darian rode in the lead vehicle. She'd only seen him twice since they left. Once at a refueling stop, where he'd asked if she needed anything, and once at the inn, where they'd stayed the first night. Both times, he'd been distant. Polite, but cold. Like he'd already forgotten why he'd brought her. She didn't know what he wanted from her, and she was too afraid to ask. The guards traveling with them didn't speak to her. They didn't even look at her. She was cargo, as far as they were concerned, something the king had decided to take, for reasons they didn't question. On the second night, they stopped at another inn, and Elara was given a small room on the top floor. She barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's face, pale and furious, and heard Garrett's voice. Cut our losses. She wondered if they were relieved she was gone. Probably. The palace appeared just after dawn on the third day. It rose out of the plains like a fortress, massive stone walls, towers that pierced the sky, gates that looked like they could withstand an army. The city sprawled around it, a chaotic mix of buildings and streets and people, more concentrated life than Elara had ever seen in one place. The convoy passed through the outer gates without stopping. Guards in dark uniforms saluted as they went by. Citizens paused to watch, their expressions wary. The Alpha King's return was an event. Elara shrank into her seat, suddenly aware of how small she was, how out of place. They pulled into an inner courtyard and the vehicles stopped. Doors opened. Guards stepped out. Darian appeared beside her window. He opened the door himself, which surprised her. "Come," he said. She climbed out, her legs stiff from sitting, and looked around. The courtyard was enormous. Gray stone, high walls, a fountain in the center that wasn't running. Everything felt cold, functional, built for war, not comfort. "This way." Darian started walking, and she hurried to follow. He led her through a side entrance, down a corridor lined with guards, and up a narrow staircase. The palace was a maze, twisting halls, locked doors, windows that looked out onto courtyards she couldn't place. She tried to memorize the route, but it was useless. She'd be lost the moment she tried to navigate it alone. They reached a heavy wooden door, and Darian stopped. "You'll stay here," he said, pushing it open. The room inside was nice. Too nice. A large bed with clean linens, a wardrobe, a desk by the window, a small sitting area with 2 chairs. It was bigger than her room back home, and infinitely more comfortable. Elara stepped inside, confused. "What is this?" "Your quarters." "My..." She turned to look at him. "Why?" "Because you need somewhere to sleep." His tone was flat, like it was obvious. "But why am I here?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "Why did you bring me? What do you want from me?" Darian was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I don't know yet." She blinked. "You don't know?" "No." "Then why?" "Because you sang the moon song without a wolf and you didn't break." He looked at her, his winter steel eyes unreadable. "Because your own pack tried to humiliate you and you stood there and gave them something beautiful instead. Because I've spent 10 years ruling wolves who only understand strength. And you..." He paused. "You're something different." Elara didn't know what to say to that. Darian stepped back into the hallway. "Someone will bring you food. Rest. I'll send for you tonight." "Tonight?" Her stomach twisted. "Why? What happens tonight?" But he was already gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click. The food arrived an hour later, brought by a silent servant who set the tray on the desk and left without a word. Elara picked at it. Bread, cheese, some kind of roasted meat she didn't recognize. It was good, but she could barely taste it. Her mind was spinning. "I'll send for you tonight." What did that mean? She paced the room, trying to calm down. Looked out the window. It faced an empty courtyard. No people, no movement. Opened the wardrobe. It was full of clothes, all in her size, which was disturbing. How had they known? She pulled out her guitar, sat on the bed, and tried to play. Her fingers stumbled over the strings. She couldn't focus. She set it aside and lay back, staring at the ceiling. This was a mistake. She'd left one prison for another. At least at home, she'd known the rules. Here, she had no idea what was expected of her. No idea what Darian wanted. No idea if she was a guest or a captive. You're something different. What did that even mean? The knock came just after sunset. Elara opened the door to find a guard, tall, stone-faced, dressed in black. "The king requests your presence," he said. Her heart jumped. Now? Now. She followed him through the maze of hallways, down 2 staircases, through a corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced men and women she didn't recognize. They passed other guards, other servants, but no one looked at her. Finally, they stopped in front of a pair of massive double doors. The guard knocked once, then pushed them open. "Go in," he said. Elara stepped through. The room beyond was enormous, a circular chamber with a vaulted ceiling and walls lined with bookshelves. In the center was a large desk covered in maps and papers. Candles burned in iron sconces, casting flickering shadows. And standing by the window looking out at the darkening sky was Darian. He didn't turn when she entered. "Close the door," he said. She did. The silence stretched. Elara stood there, her hands clenched, waiting. Finally, Darian spoke. "Do you know why I agreed to inspect your pack?" She hesitated. "No. Because they've been failing for years, losing territory, losing challenges. I was going to dissolve them." He turned to face her. "But then you sang." "I don't understand." "Neither do I." He moved closer, his expression hard. "I've heard the moon song dozens of times, at bonding ceremonies, celebrations, rituals. Every time, it's the same, powerful, loud, full of dominance and possession. Wolves singing about claiming their mates, about strength and control." He stopped in front of her. "But you sang it like it was about loss, like you were mourning something you'd never have." Elara's throat tightened. "I was." "Why?" "Because I'm wolfless. I'll never have a mate. I'll never have a bond. I'll never—" She looked away. "I'll never belong to anything." Darian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Come with me." He led her out of the study, down another hallway, and through a door she hadn't noticed before. The staircase beyond was narrow and dark, spiraling downward into the depths of the palace. Elara's pulse quickened. "Where are we going?" "You'll see." They descended for what felt like forever. The air grew colder, damper. The walls changed from finished stone to rough rock. Torches burned in brackets, their light weak and flickering. Finally, they reached the bottom. A long corridor stretched ahead, lined with cells. No, not cells. Cages. Massive iron cages built into the stone, each one reinforced with bars as thick as her wrist. Most were empty, but at the end of the corridor, one was occupied. Elara stopped. Inside the cage was something. It was hard to see in the dim light, but she could make out a shape, large, hunched, breathing. Darian walked toward it. "Wait," Elara whispered. "What is that?" He didn't answer. He stopped in front of the cage and looked inside. The thing moved. It shifted, rising slowly, and Elara's breath caught. It was a wolf. No, it was bigger than a wolf. Easily twice the size, maybe more, with matted black fur and eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. Its shoulders were massive, its claws long and sharp, its muzzle scarred. It looked like something out of a nightmare. And it was staring at Darian. "This," Darian said quietly, "is what I become." Elara's blood went cold. "Every night," he continued, his voice flat, "from sunset to sunrise, I transform, not into a wolf, into this, a beast, mindless, violent, uncontrollable." He glanced at her. "It's been this way for 5 years. That's—" She couldn't find words. "That's not possible. It's a curse." "Curses aren't real?" He turned to face her fully. "You're standing in a world where humans can transform into wolves, and you don't believe in curses?" She didn't have an answer for that. Darian looked back at the beast. "It happened after I took the throne. I killed my father in a challenge. It was legal, sanctioned, necessary. He was weak. The kingdom was falling apart. I did what had to be done." His jaw tightened. But his dying words were a curse. He said I'd become the monster I already was inside, And the next night, I did. The beast growled, a low rumbling sound that made Elara's skin crawl. For 5 years, Darian said, I've spent every night locked in this cage. My guards put me here before sunset. They let me out at dawn. In between, He gestured at the creature. That. Elara stared at the beast. It was watching her now, its glowing eyes fixed on her face. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because I need your help. She turned to him. What? The curse has a condition. It can only be broken if someone loves both forms, the man and the beast, completely. No fear, no hesitation, no illusion. His voice was hard. Dozens of women have tried. Nobles, warriors, healers, all of them failed. Most ran the first night. The ones who stayed couldn't handle it. They'd pretend during the day, but at night, when they saw what I became, they'd break. And you think I won't? I think you're the first person I've met who isn't afraid to face something broken. He looked at her. You've lived your whole life as an outcast. You know what it's like to be seen as a monster. Maybe that's why you didn't flinch when I brought you here. Elara's mind was reeling. You want me to… what? Stay here? Try to break your curse? I want you to survive. Survive what? The nights. Darian's expression was unreadable. Starting tonight, you'll be locked in the cage with me. Her stomach dropped. You can't be serious. I am. That thing will kill me. Maybe. He didn't look away. Or maybe it won't. Maybe you'll figure out a way to survive. You're clever, resourceful. You survived 22 years in a pack that wanted you gone. Survive this, and I'll give you anything you want. Freedom, power, a place in this kingdom, whatever you ask. And if I refuse? Then you're free to leave. He gestured toward the stairs. Walk away. Go back to your pack or find somewhere else. I won't stop you. Elara looked at the beast. It was still watching her. She thought about her father, about Garrett, about Mira's false apologies and her mother's cold silence. She thought about the life she'd left behind, small, suffocating, worthless, and she thought about Darian's words. You're something different. If I do this, she said slowly, and I survive, you'll keep your word? Yes. You'll give me a place here, a real one? Yes. She looked at him. Why does it have to be me? For the first time, something shifted in his expression, something almost vulnerable. Because you're the only one who sang like you had nothing left to lose, he said quietly. And I need someone who isn't afraid to face the truth. Tad. They put her in the cage an hour later. The guards didn't speak to her. They didn't explain. They just opened the door, gestured for her to enter, and locked it behind her. The beast was already inside. It was crouched in the far corner, its glowing eyes fixed on her. Elara pressed herself against the bars, her heart slamming against her ribs. The cage was large, maybe 20 feet across, but it felt tiny with that thing in it. Stay calm, Darian's voice came from outside the cage. He was standing just beyond the bars, his face shadowed. Don't run. Don't scream. It can smell fear. That's not helpful, Elara said, her voice shaking. If it charges, move to the side. It's fast, but it's not agile. Use the space. Darian, you'll be fine. But he didn't sound convinced, and then the sun set. The change was immediate. Darian's body convulsed. He staggered, his hands gripping the bars, and then he was falling, twisting, his form shifting and expanding. Elara watched in horror as the man disappeared and the beast took over. It rose on all fours, shaking its massive head, and then it turned to look at her, and roared. The sound was deafening, a primal, guttural cry that rattled the bars and made her bones vibrate. Then it charged. Elara threw herself to the side, barely avoiding the creature as it slammed into the bars where she'd been standing. The impact shook the entire cage. It spun, faster than something that size should be able to move, and lunged again. She rolled, scrambled, her hands scraping against the stone floor. Stop, she shouted. Stop, please. It didn't stop. It came at her again and again, relentless, its claws scraping the floor, its teeth snapping inches from her face. Elara's mind raced. She couldn't fight it. She couldn't outrun it. So she did the only thing she could think of. She started talking. Okay, she said, breathless, pressing herself into a corner. Okay, you're angry. I get it. You're trapped. You're cursed. You didn't ask for this." The beast paused, just for a second. "You were a person," Elara continued, her voice shaking. "A king. You made hard choices. You did what you thought was right, and now you're stuck like this, and it's not fair." The beast growled, low and threatening. "I know what it's like," she said, "to be something people don't want, to be trapped in a life you didn't choose, to be told you're broken." It took a step closer. "But you're not just a monster," Elara said. "You're Darien, and Darien brought me here because he thought I could survive you. So, here I am." The beast stopped. It was less than 5 feet away now, its glowing eyes locked on hers. Elara's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. "I'm not going to run," she whispered. "I have nowhere to go. So if you're going to kill me, do it. But if you're not—" She swallowed. "Then let me stay." The silence stretched, and then, slowly, the beast sat down. It didn't take its eyes off her, but it didn't attack. Elara let out a shaky breath. "Okay," she said. "Okay, we're good." The beast huffed, a sound that might have been agreement or dismissal, and for the rest of the night it watched her. She didn't sleep. She didn't move. She just sat there, pressed into the corner, staring back at the creature that had once been a king. And when the sun finally rose and the beast began to shift back into Darien, Elara realized something. She'd survived. Against all odds, she'd survived. Darien woke on the floor of the cage, his body aching, his mind foggy. The first thing he saw was Elara. She was sitting against the wall, her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. But she was alive. "You stayed," he said, his voice hoarse. "I didn't have a choice." But there was no bitterness in her tone, just exhaustion. He sat up slowly, running a hand through his hair. "You talked to it." "I talked to you." He looked at her. "It doesn't usually listen." "Maybe it just needed someone to try." She met his gaze. "You're not as mindless as you think." Darien didn't respond. The guards opened the cage and he stepped out, pulling on the robe they handed him. He looked back at Elara. "Tonight, you'll do it again." She didn't argue. She just nodded. And Darien realized, with a strange twist in his chest, that he'd finally found someone who wasn't afraid to see him for what he truly was, both man and monster. The second night was worse. Elara knew what to expect this time, the transformation, the roar, the initial violence, but knowing didn't make it easier. The moment the sun dipped below the horizon and Darien's body began to twist and convulse, her stomach turned. She'd spent the day in her quarters, trying to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept replaying the previous night, the beast's glowing eyes, the way it had charged at her, the sound of its claws scraping stone. She'd survived by talking, by staying calm, by treating it like something more than a mindless animal. But she didn't know if it would work twice. When the guards came to escort her back to the cage, she didn't resist. She walked down those dark, spiraling stairs with her head up and her hands steady, even though everything inside her was screaming to run. Darien was already waiting inside the cage. He looked tired, drawn, like he hadn't slept either. "You don't have to do this," he said as the guards locked the door behind her. "Yes, I do." Elara moved to the corner she'd claimed the night before. "We made a deal. The deal was that you'd try. You tried. You survived one night. That's more than anyone else has done. One night isn't enough to break a curse. It's enough to prove you're braver than you should be." He looked at her, and something in his expression was different, softer. "You can leave, Elara. I won't hold you to this." "Where would I go?" she asked quietly. "Back to a pack that doesn't want me? Out into the world alone with no wolf and no protection?" She shook her head. "At least here I have a purpose." "Your purpose is to survive a monster?" "My purpose," she said, meeting his gaze, "is to prove that I'm more than what everyone else sees." Darien opened his mouth to respond, but the sun chose that moment to vanish completely. The change took him, and once again, Elara was alone with the beast. This time, it didn't charge immediately. It circled her instead, slow, deliberate, its massive head low to the ground. Its eyes tracked her every movement, glowing in the dim torchlight. Elara stayed still, her back against the bars. "Hello again," she said, her voice only shaking a little. "Remember me?" The beast growled, low and rumbling, like distant thunder. "I know. You don't like being locked up. Neither do I, if it helps." She tried to keep her tone light, conversational. "But we're stuck here together, so we might as well make the best of it." It took a step closer. Elara's pulse spiked, but she forced herself not to move. "I'm not afraid of you." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But the beast stopped anyway, its head tilted slightly, ears swiveling toward her. "You're angry," Elara continued. "I get that. You didn't ask for this. You were a king, strong, powerful, in control, and now every night you lose everything. That must be terrifying." The beast's tail lashed once. "But you're still in there," she said softly. "I can see it. The way you hesitated last night. The way you're listening now. You're not just a monster. You're Darien, and Darien is—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish that sentence. The beast sat down, just like the night before. Elara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, we're good." The beast huffed, a sound that might have been agreement or dismissal, and settled onto its haunches, watching her with those unnerving, glowing eyes. And for the next several hours, she talked. She told the beast about her life in the Ashwood pack, about her father's disappointment, her brother's cruelty, her sister's false kindness. She told it about the night she'd spent alone in a room, writing songs no one would hear. She told it about the cliffs where she used to sing and the way the wind sounded in the trees. She told it about the day her mother stopped saying her name. "I was 14, Elara said, her voice quiet in the darkness. "I came downstairs for breakfast, and she looked right through me, like I wasn't there. I thought maybe she was angry about something, so I asked if she was okay, and she just turned away, started talking to Mira about some dress fitting." She paused. "That's when I realized it wasn't anger. It was erasure. I'd become invisible." The beast's ears twitched. "After that, it got easier for everyone. Father stopped making excuses for me. Garrett stopped pretending to care. Even Mira, who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, started treating me like furniture." Elara's throat tightened. The worst part wasn't the cruelty. It was the indifference. At least cruelty acknowledges you exist. The beast shifted closer, not threatening, just closer. "I used to wonder what I did wrong," Elara continued. "If I'd been nicer, quieter, more useful, maybe they would have kept loving me. But then I realized it wasn't about what I did. It was about what I was, and I couldn't change that." The beast made a sound, soft, almost like a whine. Elara looked at it. "You understand, don't you? Being trapped in something you can't control. Being judged for something you didn't choose." The glowing eyes stared back at her, and for a moment she could have sworn she saw recognition there. When dawn finally broke and the transformation reversed, Darien opened his eyes to find Elara asleep in the corner, her head resting against the bars, her face streaked with dried tears. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the cage door, and knocked for the guards to let him out. But before he left, he looked back. And for the first time in 5 years, he felt something other than rage or despair. He felt understood. The pattern continued. Every night, Elara was locked in the cage with the beast. Every night she talked to it, about her past, about the world outside, about anything she could think of. And every night, the beast listened. It stopped charging after the 3rd night, stopped growling after the 5th. By the 7th night, it would sit near her, close enough that she could see the scars on its muzzle, the way its breathing slowed when she spoke. On the 9th night, she sang. She'd been talking about music, about the guitar she'd taught herself to play, about the songs she'd written in secret, when the beast made a sound, not a growl, something softer, curious. "You want to hear one?" Elara asked. The beast's ears perked up. She took a breath and sang the first song that came to mind, a simple melody she'd written years ago, about loneliness and longing, and the hope that somewhere, somehow, things could be different. Her voice was rough at first, shaky with nerves. But as she continued, it steadied. The notes filled the cage, echoing off the stone walls. The beast went completely still. When she finished, the silence stretched long and heavy. Then the beast lowered its massive head and rested it on its paws. Elara's chest tightened. You liked that, she whispered. The beast's eyes drifted closed, and for the rest of the night, it slept. During the day, Darian was different too. He started spending time with her outside the cage. He'd come to her quarters in the afternoon, and they'd talk about the kingdom, about politics, about the packs he'd visited and the wolves he'd ruled. You're too rigid, Elara said one afternoon. They were in his study, maps spread across the desk. You rule through fear, and fear only works until someone decides they're not afraid anymore. Fear's reliable, Darian replied, not looking up from the map. Loyalty isn't. Loyalty is stronger than fear. It just takes longer to build. I don't have time for longer. I have packs on the verge of rebellion, borders under constant threat, and a council that questions every decision I make. He straightened, his jaw tight. Fear keeps them in line. For now, Elara leaned against the desk. But what happens when you're not the scariest thing in the room anymore? What happens when someone stronger comes along? No one stronger has come along in 10 years. Yet. She met his gaze. You can't hold a kingdom together with fear alone, Darian. Eventually, it breaks. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You talk like someone who's spent a lifetime watching people destroy themselves. I have. She picked up one of the maps, studying it. My father ruled our pack the same way. Fear, intimidation, constant displays of dominance. And look where it got him. Losing territory, losing wolves, losing respect. He was so busy proving he was strong that he forgot to actually lead. And what would you do differently? Elara set down the map. I'd give people a reason to stay beyond fear. I'd show them that strength isn't just about how hard you can hit. It's about how you solve problems, how you protect the weak, how you build something that lasts. She paused. You don't need to be the scariest person in the room if you're the wisest. Darian looked at her, something shifting in his expression. You don't talk like someone who grew up powerless, he said quietly. I didn't have power, Elara replied, but I paid attention. I watched. I learned. She smiled slightly. You'd be surprised what you can figure out when no one thinks you're worth noticing. He didn't respond immediately, but later, when she left his study, she noticed him staring at the maps with a different expression, like he was seeing them and his kingdom through new eyes. But not everyone in the palace was pleased with Elara's presence. The court had noticed. Whispers followed her through the corridors. Eyes tracked her every movement. The Alpha King's mysterious guest, a wolfless girl from a failing pack, was the subject of endless speculation. Some thought she was a curiosity, a pet. Others thought she was an insult, and a few thought she was dangerous. Lady Katrine was among the latter. She was a high-ranking wolf from the Ironclaw pack, beautiful, powerful, and ambitious. Her family controlled vast territories in the north, and she'd been positioning herself as a potential mate for Darian for years. She attended every court function, made strategic alliances, demonstrated her strength at every opportunity. She'd tried to break the curse herself 2 years ago. She'd lasted 3 nights before she broke down sobbing and begged to be released. Now, watching Darian spend his afternoons with a wolfless nobody who'd somehow survived nearly 2 weeks in that cage, she was furious. She cornered Elara in the corridor one evening, flanked by 2 other noble wolves, both female, both watching Elara with barely concealed contempt. You, Katrine said, her voice sharp. The Ashwood girl. We need to talk. Elara stopped, her stomach tightening. About what? About the fact that you're making a fool of yourself. Katrine stepped closer, her eyes cold and assessing. Do you actually think the king cares about you? You're a distraction, a novelty, something to pass the time until he gets bored. I'm not trying to... Yes, you are. Katrine's smile was cruel. You're trying to do what dozens of better women have failed to do. You think you're special because you lasted a few nights with that thing? You're not. You're just too stupid to know when to quit. One of the other wolves laughed, high and mocking. Elara's face burned, but she kept her voice steady. I'm not trying to break the curse for myself. I'm trying to help. Help? Katrine cut her off. You can't even help yourself. You're wolfless, powerless, worthless. The only reason you're still alive is because the king finds you amusing. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper. But amusement fades. And when it does, you'll be alone. Again. Just like you were in that pathetic pack you came from. The words hit harder than Elara expected, because part of her believed them. Part of her had been waiting for Darian to realize she wasn't worth the effort. "Leave her alone, Katrine," the voice came from behind them, deep, cold, absolute. They all turned. Darian stood at the end of the corridor, his expression dark and dangerous. Katrine straightened immediately, her confident mask slipping back into place. "My king, I was just threatening my guest." His voice was ice. "I heard." "I wasn't threatening. I was simply offering advice. You were reminding her that she's wolfless, powerless, and doesn't belong here." Darian stepped forward, and the temperature in the corridor seemed to drop. "Tell me, Katrine, how is that different from a threat?" Katrine's jaw tightened. "I only meant, I know what you meant." He stopped directly in front of her, and despite the fact that she was tall and powerful in her own right, she looked small next to him. "You meant that you think birth and bloodlines matter more than courage, that having a wolf makes you superior, that strength is the only thing worth respecting." "It is. Then why did you fail?" His tone was brutal. "You had a wolf, you had strength, you spent 3 nights in that cage and broke. She's been there nearly 2 weeks and she's still standing. So tell me, who's really stronger?" Katrine's face flushed red. "Leave," Darian said quietly. "And if I hear you've bothered her again, we'll have a very different conversation." It wasn't a request. Katrine bowed stiffly, turned, and walked away, her companions trailing behind her like scolded children. Darian waited until they were gone, then looked at Elara. "Are you all right?" "Fine," she said, even though her hands were shaking. "She's wrong, you know?" "About which part?" "All of it." He stepped closer, his expression softening slightly. "You're not worthless, and you're not a distraction." "Then what am I?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation, Elara saw something she hadn't expected: uncertainty. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know you're the only person who's ever looked at the beast and didn't see something that needed to be destroyed." That night, something changed. The transformation happened as usual, violent, brutal, unstoppable. But when the beast rose and turned to face Elara, it didn't circle, didn't growl, didn't bare its teeth. It walked directly to her and sat down, close enough to touch. Elara stared at it, her heart pounding. The beast's glowing eyes were fixed on her face, not with aggression, but with something that looked almost like expectation. Slowly, carefully, she reached out. Her fingers brushed the top of its massive head. The beast went completely still. She kept her hand there, feeling the coarse fur, the heat radiating from its body, the slight tremor that might have been fear or anticipation. "You're still him," she whispered. "Aren't you?" The beast's eyes, those glowing, inhuman eyes, looked at her with something that might have been recognition, and then it lowered its head and rested it against her knee. Elara's breath caught. She'd heard the stories. She knew what the curse required, someone who loves both forms, completely. Without fear or illusion, she'd spent weeks surviving the beast, talking to it, singing to it, learning its moods, its rhythms, the way it responded to kindness instead of strength. But this was something else. This was trust. And in that moment, sitting in a cold stone cage with a monster's head resting on her knee, Elara realized something that terrified her more than the beast ever had. She was falling in love with Darian Thorne. Not just the king, not just the man who'd taken her from a life she hated. Both of him. The controlled, strategic king who ruled with an iron fist, and the broken, desperate beast who just wanted someone to see him as more than a monster. She loved them both. She didn't know when it had happened. Maybe it started that first night when he'd offered her a choice instead of a command. Maybe it was during those afternoon conversations, when he'd listened to her opinions like they mattered. Maybe it was every night in this cage, watching the beast slowly learn to trust her. It didn't matter when. It only mattered that it was true. "I love you," she whispered, so quietly she wasn't sure the beast could even hear. "Both of you. And I don't know what to do about it." The beast's eyes closed, and for the rest of the night, it stayed pressed against her, like she was an anchor in a storm. The next morning, the palace was in chaos. Elara woke to shouting in the corridors, the sound of running feet, doors slamming. She threw on clothes and opened her door to find a servant rushing past. "What's happening?" she called. The servant barely slowed. "The council's called an emergency session. The king's being challenged." Her blood went cold. "What?" But the servant was already gone, disappearing around a corner. Elara ran, down the stairs, through the halls, following the noise until she reached the throne room. The doors were open, and inside the chamber was packed with wolves, nobles, warriors, advisors, all shouting over each other in a cacophony of anger and accusation. At the center of it all stood Darian, his face hard, his posture rigid, and facing him, with a triumphant smile that made Elara's stomach turn, was Lady Katrin. "The law is clear," Katrin was saying, her voice carrying over the crowd. "A cursed king cannot rule. You've hidden this for 5 years, but we all know the truth now. Every night you become a monster. You're unstable, dangerous, unfit to lead." "I've ruled this kingdom for a decade," Darian said, his tone ice. "Curse or not, I've kept it strong." "For how long?" Another voice called out. A male wolf, older, with gray in his hair and scars on his face. "How long before the beast breaks free during the day? How long before it kills someone? How long before our enemies discover the truth and use it against us?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "You need to step down," Katrin said, her eyes gleaming, "voluntarily, before we're forced to remove you." Darian's hands clenched at his sides. "You're welcome to try." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. "We don't want bloodshed," the older wolf said, though his expression suggested otherwise. "But we will protect this kingdom, even from you." Elara pushed through the crowd, her heart racing. "Stop," she said. Every head turned. Dozens of eyes locked onto her, some curious, some contemptuous, all of them sharp with judgment. Katrin's smile widened. "This doesn't concern you, girl." "It does." Elara stepped forward, her voice shaking but steady. "Because you're wrong." "About what?" "About the curse." Elara looked at Darian, then back at the council. "It's not making him weaker. It's making him stronger." Katrin laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Stronger? He's a monster." "He's both," Elara said. "And that's the point. You all think strength is about dominance, about power, about never showing weakness. But Darian transforms every night into something he can't control, something terrifying and violent, and every single morning he comes back. He doesn't give up. He doesn't break. He faces it, survives it, and keeps ruling. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen." Silence rippled outward from her words. "And the curse can be broken," Elara continued. "It just requires someone to love him, both sides of him, completely, without fear or illusion." Katrin's smile was sharp as a knife. "And I suppose you're volunteering?" Elara's heart slammed against her ribs. This was it. The moment she'd been terrified of. She could lie. She could deflect. She could walk away and let them tear Darian apart. Or she could tell the truth. "Yes," she said. The room erupted. Darian stared at her, his expression stunned, something raw and vulnerable flashing across his face before he could hide it. Katrin's face twisted with rage. "You? A wolfless nobody from a failing pack? You think you can break a curse that defeated warriors, healers, and nobles?" "I don't think," Elara said, her voice cutting through the noise. "I know." "Prove it," Katrin snapped. "How?" "Tonight." Katrin stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. "If you truly love the beast, go into that cage unarmed, unguarded, with the entire court watching. Let it choose. If it accepts you, if the curse breaks, then you've proven your worth. If it doesn't," she smiled, "well, we'll have one less problem to deal with." The crowd murmured, the sound building like a wave. Darian moved. "No, absolutely not." "It's the only way," the older wolf said, his voice grave. "Let the curse decide. If the girl survives and the curse breaks, you remain king. If she doesn't—" He looked at Darian with something that might have been pity. "You step down, peacefully." "I won't let her risk her life for this," Darian said, his voice low and dangerous. "I'll do it," Elara said. Darian turned to her, his eyes blazing. "Elara, I'll do it, she repeated, louder this time. Tonight, in front of everyone, I'll go into that cage and I'll prove that love is stronger than fear. You don't have to. Yes, I do. She looked at him and her voice dropped, meant only for him. Because they're right. You need to break this curse, and I'm the only one who can. You don't know that. I do. She stepped closer, ignoring the dozens of eyes watching them. Because I meant what I said. I love you, Darian. Both of you. The man and the beast. And if that's what it takes to prove it, then I will. The silence in the throne room was absolute. Darian stared at her, his jaw tight, his hands clenched, every muscle in his body taut with barely controlled emotion. Finally, he said, his voice rough, "If you die in there, I'll never forgive myself." "Then don't let me die," Elara said softly. "Trust me, the way I trust you." They brought the entire court to the dungeons that night. Torches lined the corridor, their flames casting dancing shadows on the rough stone walls. Nobles crowded around the cage, their faces a mix of morbid anticipation, disgust, and in a few cases, something that looked almost like hope. Elara stood outside the bars, her hands steady, her heart strangely calm. She'd left her fear upstairs. Down here, there was only certainty. Darian was already inside the cage, his eyes locked on hers. He looked like he wanted to say something, 1,000 things, but couldn't find the words. "Last chance," he said quietly. "Walk away. Please." "No," she said simply. The guards opened the door. The metal hinges creaked. Elara stepped inside. They locked it behind her with a final echoing clang, and the sun set. The transformation was as brutal as ever. Elara watched. She'd never looked away, not once in all these nights, as Darian's body convulsed, bones cracking and reforming, skin splitting and healing, the horrible sounds of a curse taking hold. The crowd gasped. Some stepped back from the bars. A few looked away. The beast rose from where Darian had fallen, shaking its massive head, muscles rippling under dark fur. And then it saw her. It roared. The sound was deafening, primal, a cry of rage and pain, and something deeper that had no name. The crowd screamed, and then the beast charged. It came at her with all the violence and fury of a predator unleashed, claws scraping stone, teeth bared in a snarl that promised death. The nobles pressed back against the corridor walls, some shouting, some frozen in horror. Elara didn't move. The beast stopped inches from her face, so close she could feel its breath hot against her skin, could see the individual scars that marked its muzzle, could count the teeth that could tear her apart in seconds. She looked into its glowing eyes, and she smiled. "Hello," she said softly. "It's me." The beast growled, low, threatening, confused. "I know you're angry," she continued, her voice steady and gentle. "I know you're scared, but I'm here, and I'm not leaving, not tonight, not ever." She reached out slowly, telegraphing every movement, and placed her hand on the beast's muzzle. The crowd held its collective breath. The beast went absolutely still. "I love you," Elara whispered. "Not in spite of this. Not despite the curse or the violence or the fact that you're terrifying. I love you because you're broken, and you keep fighting. Because you're a king and a monster, and somehow, impossibly, you're both at the same time. And I don't want you to be anything other than what you are." The beast's glowing eyes locked on hers, and then slowly, so slowly, it lowered its massive head. It pressed against her hand, leaning into her touch like it was the only real thing in the world, and the cage exploded with light. Brilliant, blinding, white gold magic that erupted from where they touched and expanded outward in a shockwave that knocked everyone back, that shook the very foundations of the palace, that shattered the curse like glass. When the light faded, the beast was gone, and in its place, kneeling on the stone floor with his head still pressed against Elara's hand, was Darian. Human. Whole. Free. He looked up at her, his eyes, no longer glowing, just gray and human and filled with wonder, wide with disbelief. "You did it," he whispered. Elara sank to her knees beside him, tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking with relief and exhaustion and joy. "We did it," she said. And in front of the entire court, with dozens of witnesses watching in stunned silence, Darian Thorne pulled Elara Voss into his arms and held her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Because she was. Because she was. The court stood frozen, staring at the impossible scene before them. Their cursed king, now free, holding a wolfless girl like she'd just saved his life. Which, in a way, she had. Lady Katrine was the first to break the silence. Her voice came out strangled, disbelieving. That's not possible." The older councilman stepped forward, his scarred face unreadable. "The curse is broken. We all witnessed it." "But she's nobody," Katrine hissed. "She has no wolf, no power, no... She has something none of you had." Darian's voice cut through her protests like a blade. He stood slowly, helping Elara to her feet, his hand firm on her arm. She had courage. Katrine's face flushed red. "My king, surely you don't intend to..." "Everyone out!" Darian's tone left no room for argument. "Now!" The nobles exchanged glances, uncertain. But one by one they filed out of the dungeon, some casting backward looks at Elara, curiosity, resentment, and in a few cases, something that might have been grudging respect. Katrine lingered at the stairs, her jaw tight. "This isn't over," she said quietly, though whether she meant it for Darian or Elara wasn't clear. Then she too disappeared. The guards unlocked the cage and Darian led Elara out. Her legs felt weak, her whole body trembling with the aftermath of magic she still didn't understand. He kept his hand on her arm, steadying her as they climbed the stairs. They didn't speak until they reached his private chambers. The moment the door closed, Darian let go of her and stepped back, running both hands through his hair. He looked shaken, more rattled than she'd ever seen him. "You shouldn't have done that," he said. Elara blinked. "What?" "Put yourself in that cage, in front of them. You could have died." "But I didn't." "You could have." His voice was rough, almost angry. "Do you have any idea what would have happened if the curse hadn't broken? If the beast had..." He stopped, his jaw clenching. "I would have killed you myself." "But you didn't. That's not the point." "Then what is?" He turned to face her fully. "The point is that you risked everything for me. For a curse you had no obligation to break. For a king you barely know. For a kingdom that's already made it clear they don't want you here." "They don't want me yet," Elara corrected. "There's a difference." You needed help. I helped." She crossed her arms. "I don't see what's so complicated about that." "What's complicated," Darian said slowly, "is that you just told an entire court full of wolves that you loved me. Both sides of me. Do you understand what that means?" Her stomach twisted. "I know what I said." "Do you?" He stepped closer. "Because that wasn't just breaking a curse. That was a declaration, in front of witnesses. In wolf culture, that's as binding as a mate bond." Elara's breath caught. "I didn't know." "I know you didn't." His expression softened slightly. "Which is why I'm giving you a chance to take it back." "Take it back?" "Tell them it was just words. That you said what you needed to say to break the curse." He looked away. "I'll support whatever story you want to tell. But if you don't take it back..." He paused. "You'll be expected to stay. As my mate. As queen." The word hung in the air between them. Queen. Elara had never imagined herself as anything close to royalty. She was the girl no one wanted, the outcast, the mistake. But she'd also never imagined loving someone the way she loved Darian. "I'm not taking it back," she said quietly. He looked at her sharply. "Elara, I meant what I said. I love you, both of you." She met his gaze. "And if that means dealing with whatever comes next, then that's what I'll do." Darian stared at her for a long moment. Then, without warning, he crossed the distance between them and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, fierce, like he'd been holding back for weeks and finally couldn't anymore. His hands came up to frame her face, and Elara's world narrowed to the feeling of his mouth on hers, the heat of his body, the way her heart slammed against her ribs. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Darian rested his forehead against hers. "You're impossible," he murmured. "I know. And stubborn." Also true. And you just made yourself a target. He pulled back slightly, his expression serious. Half the court will see you as an upstart. The other half will see you as a threat. Katrine will make your life hell, and that's just the beginning. I've survived worse, Elara said. Have you? She thought about her family, about the years of isolation, the constant reminders that she was worthless, the way her own pack had tried to humiliate her in front of the Alpha King. Yes, she said. I have. Darian studied her face, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. Then I suppose we'd better prepare you, he said. The announcement came the next morning. Darian called the full court to the throne room and made it official. Elara Voss, the wolfless girl from the Ashwood pack, was now his mate and future queen. The reaction was immediate and divided. Some wolves, mostly younger ones, or those who'd witnessed the curse breaking, bowed respectfully. They'd seen what she'd done, and even if they didn't understand it, they recognized it as extraordinary. Others looked like they'd swallowed poison. Lady Katrine stood near the front, her face a mask of cold fury. The older councilman, whose name Elara had learned was Torsten, looked skeptical but resigned, and scattered throughout the crowd were wolves whose expressions ranged from disbelief to outright contempt. This is madness, someone muttered from the back. She has no wolf, another voice added. How can she be queen? Darian's eyes swept the room, his expression hard. Anyone who has objections is welcome to challenge my decision, directly, to my face. Silence. No one moved. That's what I thought. Darian's voice carried absolute authority. The curse is broken. My mate has proven herself, and anyone who cannot accept that is free to leave my court. Still, no one spoke, but Elara could feel the resentment radiating from dozens of wolves. This wasn't acceptance. This was fear. They were afraid of Darian, afraid of challenging him directly, but that fear wouldn't last forever, and she knew it. The real test came 3 days later. A dispute had arisen between two packs, the Stonefang pack in the east and the Redwater pack to their south. A border disagreement that had been simmering for months had finally boiled over into violence. 3 wolves dead, dozens injured, and both alphas demanding the king's intervention. Darian had been preparing to handle it himself, but Elara surprised him by asking to come along. It's a territorial dispute, he said, looking up from the report spread across his desk. It'll be brutal. Lots of posturing, lots of threats. Not exactly. I want to see how you handle it, Elara interrupted. If I'm going to be queen, I need to understand how this works. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, but stay close, and don't speak unless I tell you to. She agreed. But when they arrived at the disputed border 2 days later, everything went wrong. The 2 alphas, Cormac of Stonefang and Talia of Redwater, were already there, along with their respective enforcers. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Both sides were armed, both sides were furious, and both sides were convinced they were right. Darian listened to their arguments for nearly an hour. Cormac claimed the border had been agreed upon decades ago, and Redwater was encroaching. Talia claimed the old boundary was based on a river that had changed course, and they were simply following the natural line. Both had evidence. Both had witnesses. Both refused to back down. Darian's solution was typically blunt. The border stays where it was originally drawn. Redwater pulls back. If there's further encroachment, I'll dissolve the pack and redistribute the territory. Talia's face went red. That's not fair. The river moved. It's not our fault. I don't care. Darian's voice was cold. The law is clear. Original boundaries stand unless both parties agree to renegotiate. You didn't seek agreement. You took. That's theft, and I don't tolerate it. But this discussion is over. Talia looked like she wanted to argue further, but one glance at Darian's expression stopped her. She nodded stiffly and turned away, her wolves following. Cormac smirked, clearly satisfied, and Elara, watching from the side, felt something twist in her chest. This wasn't justice. This was dominance. Later that night, when they were alone in the tent that had been set up for them, she finally spoke. You made the wrong call, she said. Darian looked up from the map he'd been studying. Excuse me? With the Redwater pack. You made the wrong call. His expression hardened. The law was clear. The law was outdated. Elara sat down across from him. That river has been changing course for years. Everyone in the region knows it. The old boundary doesn't make sense anymore. The boundary stands because it was agreed upon. If I let one pack redraw borders because nature changed, every pack in the kingdom will start claiming the same thing. Then create a new law. She leaned forward. One that accounts for natural changes. One that requires mediation instead of threats. Mediation doesn't work with wolves. They respect strength, not conversation. They respect strength because that's all you've ever given them. Elara's voice was firm. But what happens when you're not the strongest anymore? What happens when another king rises and decides to rule the same way you do? Then I'll kill him. And if you can't? Darian's jaw tightened. What's your point? My point is that fear only works until it doesn't. You need something more sustainable. She gestured at the map. Talia wasn't wrong. The river moved, her pack adapted, and you punished her for it. That's not justice. That's just enforcing old rules because they're easier than creating new ones. So what would you have done? I would have brought both alphas together, walked the border with them, found a compromise, maybe split the difference, maybe agreed on a new boundary based on the current river course with protections against future changes. She paused. I would have solved the problem instead of just asserting dominance. Darian stared at her. You think I'm wrong, she said. I think you're idealistic. He set down the map. But I also think, he trailed off, something shifting in his expression. I think you might be right. Elara blinked. What? Talia's pack has been loyal for years. She's a good alpha, and I just humiliated her in front of her wolves because I didn't want to look weak. He rubbed his face. That's going to create resentment, maybe even rebellion. So fix it. How? Call them back, both of them. Tell them you've reconsidered. Walk the border. Find a compromise. She held his gaze. Show them you're strong enough to admit when there's a better solution. Darian was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood. Get some sleep. We're leaving at dawn. Where are we going? To fix my mistake. They returned to the border the next day and called both alphas back. Cormac arrived looking smug. Talia arrived looking wary. Darian didn't waste time. I've reconsidered my ruling. Cormac's smile faded. What? The original boundary was based on the river's course 50 years ago. The river has moved. It makes sense that the boundary should move with it. He looked at Talia. But I also understand Stonefang's concern about precedent. So here's my proposal. He laid out a new boundary, one that followed the current river course but included protections for both packs if the river shifted again in the future. It required both sides to give up a small portion of land, but it also gave both sides something they wanted. It wasn't perfect, but it was fair. Cormac looked unhappy, but he nodded. I can accept that. Talia's expression was stunned. You're really willing to change the ruling? I'm willing to find a better solution, Darian said. If you both agree. I agree, Talia said quickly. Cormac hesitated, then sighed. Fine. I agree. And just like that, the dispute was over. No threats, no violence, just a solution that both sides could live with. As they rode away from the border, Darian glanced at Elara. That felt different, he said. Different how? Like I actually solved something instead of just forcing compliance. He paused. I don't know if I like it, Elara laughed. You'll get used to it. Will I? Yes, because it works better. She looked at him. And because you're smart enough to see that. He didn't respond, but something in his expression had changed. He was listening, really listening. And that, Elara realized, was the beginning of something important. Word spread quickly about what had happened at the border. The story changed depending on who told it, but the core remained the same. The Alpha King had reversed his own ruling. He'd listened to both sides, found a compromise, and solved the problem without bloodshed. It was unprecedented, and it sent shockwaves through the court. Some wolves saw it as weakness. Darian had backed down, admitted he was wrong, unthinkable for a king who'd ruled through fear for a decade. But others saw it differently. They saw a king who was strong enough to change his mind, a king who cared more about solutions than ego, a king who was, perhaps, evolving. And standing beside him, influencing him, was Elara, the wolfless girl who'd broken a curse. Katrine, of course, was furious. She cornered Elara in the palace gardens a week later, her two companions flanking her as always. "You're making him weak," Katrine hissed. Elara set down the book she'd been reading. "I'm making him better." "Better?" Katrine's laugh was sharp. "He's reversing rulings, making compromises, showing mercy. That's not strength, that's softness." "Strength isn't about how hard you can hit," Elara said calmly. "It's about how you solve problems. Darian's learning that. He doesn't need to learn anything. He's the Alpha King. He was perfect before you showed up." "Perfect?" Elara stood. "He was cursed, Katrine. Every night he turned into a monster he couldn't control. That's not perfect. That's broken." Katrine's eyes flashed. "And you think you fixed him?" "I think we fixed each other." Elara met her gaze without flinching. "And I think that terrifies you. Because if strength can look like something other than dominance, then what does that make you?" Katrine's face went pale with rage. "You're nothing," she spat. "A nobody from a failing pack. You have no wolf, no power, no right to be here. And one day Darian will realize that. He'll see you for what you really are. A mistake." "Maybe," Elara said quietly. "But until then, I'm his mate, and his queen, and there's nothing you can do about it." Katrine's hand twitched toward the knife at her belt. "I wouldn't," a voice said from behind them. They all turned. Darian stood at the edge of the garden, his expression dark. Katrine straightened. "My king, I was just threatening my mate. Again." He walked toward them slowly, and even Katrine had the sense to step back. "I warned you, Katrine. I told you what would happen if you bothered her again." "I wasn't threatening. I was simply calling her a mistake, questioning her right to be here, implying that she's worthless." Darian stopped in front of Katrine. "Tell me, how is that different from a threat?" Katrine's jaw clenched. "She's influencing you, making you weak. She's making me think." His voice was cold. "And apparently that's more terrifying to you than any amount of violence I could inflict." "My king, you're dismissed from court, effective immediately." Darian's tone was final. "Return to your pack, and if I hear you've spoken against my mate again, I'll dissolve Ironclaw and scatter your wolves to the winds." Katrine's face went white. "You can't." "I can, and I will." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "Test me." For a moment, Katrine looked like she might argue. Then her shoulders slumped, and she bowed. "As you command, my king." She turned and walked away, her companions following. Darian watched her go, then turned to Elara. "Are you all right?" "Fine." Elara's voice was steady, even though her hands were shaking. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I should have dealt with her weeks ago." He paused. "She's right about one thing, though." Elara looked up. "What?" "You are influencing me." His expression softened slightly. "And I'm not sure I hate it." 3 weeks later, the first real test came. A challenge was issued, not to Darian, but to Elara. A young wolf named Marcus, from a minor pack in the west, stood before the court and demanded the right to challenge Elara's position as queen. "She has no wolf," Marcus declared, his voice ringing through the throne room. "By law, she cannot hold rank in our society. I challenge her claim." The court went silent. Darian's eyes went cold. "You challenge my mate?" "I challenge the law that allowed a wolfless human to become queen," Marcus corrected. "If she wants the title, she should prove she deserves it, in the traditional way." "And what way is that?" Elara asked before Darian could respond. Marcus looked at her with barely concealed contempt. "A trial of worth. 3 challenges. If you pass all 3, you keep your title. If you fail even one, you step down. And if I refuse? Then everyone will know you're exactly what they think you are, a fraud." Darian stood, his voice lethal. "This is madness. She's already proven herself by breaking a curse that—" "I accept," Elara said. Every head turned. Darian stared at her. "Elara, I accept," she repeated, louder. 3 challenges. Name them. Marcus smiled. The first challenge is strength. You'll face one of our warriors in single combat. I have no wolf. I can't fight a... Then you'll lose. His smile widened. The second challenge is strategy. You'll be given a scenario, a pack dispute, and you'll have to solve it. The council will judge your solution. And the third? The third, Marcus said slowly, is leadership. You'll take command of a group of wolves in a crisis situation. If you fail, people die. The court murmured. These weren't just challenges. They were designed to be impossible for someone without a wolf. And everyone knew it. But Elara met Marcus's gaze and said, "When do we start?" The first challenge was brutal. They put her in a ring with a seasoned warrior named Kael, a massive wolf who'd won dozens of fights and showed no mercy. Elara had no chance in a direct fight, so she didn't fight directly. She studied Kael's movements during the first few exchanges, dodging more than blocking, staying light on her feet. He was strong and fast, but he was also predictable. He favored his right side. He telegraphed his strikes, and he was arrogant enough to assume she'd go down easy. She used all of it. When he lunged, she sidestepped and used his momentum against him, sending him stumbling. When he tried to grab her, she slipped through his guard and struck at pressure points, not hard enough to injure, but enough to slow him down. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. After 20 minutes, Kael was breathing hard, frustrated, making mistakes, and Elara was still standing. Finally, she saw her opening. He overextended on a strike, and she swept his legs, dropping him to the ground. Before he could recover, she had a blade, borrowed from one of the guards, pressed to his throat. "Yield," she said quietly. Kyle stared at her, stunned. Then he nodded. The court erupted in shocked murmurs. She'd won. Without a wolf, without strength, she'd beaten a warrior through intelligence and strategy. Darian's expression was caught somewhere between pride and disbelief, and Marcus, standing at the edge of the ring, looked furious. The second challenge came 2 days later. They presented her with a complex pack dispute, 2 allied packs arguing over shared hunting grounds, both with valid claims, both refusing to compromise. It was the kind of problem that usually ended in bloodshed. Elara studied the details for an hour, then presented her solution to the council. Instead of forcing one pack to yield, she proposed rotating access. Each pack would have exclusive rights to the territory for alternating seasons, with a shared neutral period for major hunts. It required both sides to give something up, but it also gave both sides what they needed. The council deliberated. Then Torsten, the older councilman, nodded. "It's fair, and it might actually work." The other council members agreed. Challenge 2 passed. The third challenge was the hardest. They staged a crisis. A fire in a village, wolves trapped inside, limited time to evacuate. Elara was given command of a rescue team. Most of them didn't want to listen to her. They questioned every order, doubted every decision. But she didn't back down. She assessed the situation quickly, identified the buildings most at risk, organized teams based on their strengths, sent the fastest wolves to warn outlying homes while the strongest worked on rescue. It wasn't perfect. She made mistakes, lost precious seconds on a few calls, but by the time the simulation ended, everyone had made it out alive. The council reviewed the results. Then Torsten stood and addressed the court. "She passed," he said simply, "all 3 challenges. By law, her claim stands." The room was silent for a beat. Then slowly, wolves began to bow. Not all of them, but enough. And Elara, standing in the center of the throne room with dirt on her clothes and exhaustion in her bones, realized something. She'd done it. She'd proven herself. Not with a wolf, not with power, but with intelligence, courage, and the willingness to do what others wouldn't. Darian stood and walked to her side. He didn't say anything. He just took her hand. And in that moment, the message was clear. She wasn't just his mate. She was his equal. And the kingdom, whether they liked it or not, would have to accept that. And the kingdom, whether they liked it or not, would have to accept that. But acceptance, Elara learned quickly, was a slow and grudging thing. The weeks following her trial were tense. Some wolves bowed when she passed. Others looked right through her. A few still muttered about the wolfless queen behind closed doors, though they were careful never to say it where Darien could hear. Elara didn't let it bother her. She'd spent her entire life being dismissed. She knew how to survive it. What surprised her was how much the kingdom itself needed fixing. Now that she had access to council meetings, to reports from across the territories, to the inner workings of Darien's rule, she could see the cracks everywhere. Packs on the verge of collapse, border disputes that had been simmering for years, wolves leaving for safer territories because they didn't trust the leadership to protect them. Darien had held the kingdom together through sheer force of will, but force, Elara realized, could only do so much. One evening, 3 weeks after her trial, she found Darien in his study staring at a map with a look of pure frustration. "What's wrong?" she asked. He didn't look up. "The Wintermere pack is falling apart. Their alpha died 2 months ago, and the succession is contested. 3 wolves claiming the title, all of them refusing to back down. It's turning violent. So go there, mediate." "I did, last week." He rubbed his face. "I told them to settle it with a challenge. Winner takes the pack. Clean, simple, done." And 2 of the challengers are dead. The third one is barely holding on, and half the pack has already left for other territories. He slammed his hand on the desk. "I gave them a solution. They destroyed themselves anyway." Elara studied the map. "Maybe you gave them the wrong solution." He looked at her sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You told them to fight for dominance. That's what wolves understand, right? The strongest leads." She traced a finger along the Wintermere territory. "But what if none of the challengers were actually fit to lead? What if the problem wasn't who was strongest, but whether strength was the right measure at all? So what would you have done?" "I would have asked what the pack needed." She met his gaze. "A leader isn't just the best fighter. It's someone who can solve problems, manage resources, keep people safe. Maybe the strongest challenger would have been a terrible alpha. Maybe the pack needs someone else entirely." Darien was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Come with me." "Where?" "Wintermere. We're going to fix this." They arrived at the Wintermere territory 2 days later. It was a mess. The pack lands were in the northern mountains, harsh and cold, even in late spring. The main settlement was half empty, buildings damaged from recent fights, wolves scattered and distrustful. The remaining challenger, a scarred male named Rowan, met them at the edge of the territory. He looked exhausted, his right arm bandaged, his expression wary. "My king," Rowan said, bowing stiffly. "I didn't expect you to return." "I'm here to end this," Darien said. "One way or another." Rowan's jaw tightened. "I'm the last challenger standing. The pack is mine by right." "Is it?" Elara stepped forward. "How many wolves are left?" Rowan glared at her. "Enough." "How many?" He hesitated. 43. "You had over 100 before the succession crisis," Elara said. "Where did the rest go?" "They left. Cowards. All of them. Or maybe they left because they didn't want to die in a pointless power struggle." She looked around at the damaged buildings, the empty streets. "You won the challenge, Rowan. Congratulations. You're now alpha of a dying pack." His face flushed with anger. "I did what was necessary." "You did what you thought strength demanded," Elara interrupted. "But strength didn't save your pack. It destroyed it." "Then what would you have me do?" Rowan's voice was bitter. "Roll over? Let the pack dissolve?" "No." Elara turned to Darien. "I'd have you rebuild, but not alone." Darien raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" "The pack doesn't need just an alpha. It needs structure, support, a council to help distribute the work." She looked at Rowan. "You're strong. You can protect the territory, lead hunts, defend against threats. But can you manage resources? Negotiate with neighboring packs? Resolve internal disputes fairly?" Rowan's silence was answer enough. "Then find people who can," Elara said. "Appoint advisors, build a council, share the leadership instead of hoarding it." "That's not how packs work," Rowan said. "It's how this pack will work if it wants to survive." Elara's voice was firm. "You can be a strong alpha or a dead one. Your choice." Rowan stared at her, clearly struggling between pride and pragmatism. Finally, he looked at Darien. "Is she serious?" "Completely," Darien said. "And if you're smart, you'll listen. Over the next 3 days, Elara worked with Rowan and the remaining pack members to restructure Wintermere. She identified wolves with skills beyond fighting, a female named Iris, who was brilliant with resource management, an older male named Finn, who had a gift for mediation, a young wolf named Kara, who understood trade routes and alliances. She helped Rowan build a council, distribute responsibilities, and create a system where leadership wasn't just about dominance, but about competence. It wasn't perfect. There were arguments, setbacks, moments where Rowan's pride nearly derailed everything. But by the end of the 3rd day, Wintermere had a functioning government, and word of what Elara had done began to spread. They returned to the capital to find the court buzzing with gossip. The wolfless queen had restructured an entire pack, without fighting, without asserting dominance, just through intelligence and strategy. Some wolves were impressed, others were horrified. And Torsten, the old councilman, requested a private meeting with Darian and Elara the day after their return. They met in Darian's study, the 3 of them seated around the desk. Torsten looked tired, his scarred face more lined than usual. "I need to speak plainly," he said. "Go ahead," Darian replied. "What you did at Wintermere, restructuring the pack, creating a council, it's going to have consequences." Torsten looked at Elara. "You're changing how wolves think about leadership, about power. Some will see it as progress. Others will see it as a threat." "Let them," Elara said. "The old way wasn't working. The old way kept the kingdom stable for generations." "The old way created the curse that nearly destroyed your king," Elara countered. "Darian's father ruled through fear and dominance, and look what it got him. A son who had to kill him to save the kingdom, and a curse born from rage and resentment." Torsten flinched. "I'm not saying dominance has no place," Elara continued, "but it can't be the only tool. If you want a kingdom that lasts, you need more than fear. You need systems, structures, trust. And you think you can build that?" Torsten asked. "A wolfless girl from a failing pack?" "I think I can try." Elara met his gaze. "And I think the alternative, watching this kingdom tear itself apart, is worse." Torsten was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "There's going to be resistance, real resistance. Not just muttering in corners, but organized opposition." "From who?" Darian asked. "The old guard. Wolves who built their power on the current system." Torsten leaned back. "They'll see this as an attack on everything they've worked for, and they'll fight back. Let them fight," Darian said. "We'll deal with it." "Will you?" Torsten looked between them. "Because if this turns into open conflict, you'll have to choose, defend Elara's vision or return to the old way to keep the peace." "There's no choice to make," Darian said flatly. "I'm with her." Torsten nodded slowly. "Then prepare yourselves, because the real battle is just beginning." The real battle came sooner than expected. A coalition of traditionalist wolves, led by an alpha named Grigor from the Eastern Territories, issued a formal challenge to Elara's position. Not through a trial of worth this time, through a vote of no confidence. They gathered enough support from conservative packs to force a full council session where they would argue that Elara's reforms were destabilizing the kingdom and demand that she step down as queen. The session was scheduled for 3 weeks out, and Elara knew she was walking into a fight she might not win. "They're going to tear you apart," Darian said the night before the session. They were in their private chambers, Elara pacing while Darian watched from the window. "Probably," she agreed. "You could withdraw, avoid the whole thing, and let them think they were right?" She shook her head. "No, I'm going to face them." "Elara, I know what I'm doing." She stopped pacing. "They think I'm weak because I don't have a wolf. They think my reforms are naive. They think I'm going to crumble under pressure." She met his gaze. "I'm going to prove them wrong." "How?" "By showing them what strength actually looks like." The council chamber was packed the next day. Every major alpha, every influential noble, every wolf with any claim to power had come to watch. The air was thick with tension. Gregor stood at the center, a massive wolf with gray fur and cold eyes. He'd been an alpha for 20 years, ruled his territory with an iron fist, and had no patience for what he called soft leadership. He addressed the chamber with confidence. "We are here because our kingdom is at a crossroads. For generations we have thrived under a system based on strength, dominance, and clear hierarchy. But in recent months, that system has been undermined. He looked directly at Elara. The wolfless queen has introduced reforms that weaken our traditions. She has restructured pacts, created councils, encouraged negotiation over combat. And while she claims this is progress, I say it is weakness disguised as wisdom. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Our enemies are watching, Gregor continued. They see a kingdom led by a cursed king, now freed, yes, but still vulnerable, and a queen who cannot even shift. They see division, uncertainty, change, and they will exploit it. He turned to address the full council. I call for a vote of no confidence in Queen Elara, not because I doubt her intentions, but because I doubt her ability to lead wolves. She is human. She does not understand our ways, and her presence weakens us all. The chamber erupted in shouts, some in support, some in opposition. Darian stood, his voice cutting through the noise. Gregor makes valid points, but he's also wrong about one fundamental thing. The room went quiet. Elara doesn't weaken us. She makes us stronger, and I can prove it. He gestured to Elara. She stood, her heart pounding, and walked to the center of the chamber. Every eye was on her. Gregor says I don't understand your ways, she began, her voice steady. He's right, I don't. I wasn't raised in a world where strength is the only currency, where dominance is the only path to respect. I was raised in a world where I was told I was nothing. She looked around the room. I was wolfless, powerless, unwanted. My own pack tried to use me as a joke. And when I sang the moon song, they expected me to fail, to humiliate myself, to prove that I was exactly what they thought I was, worthless. But I didn't fail. I survived. And not because I was strong in the way you define strength, but because I was willing to see things differently. She turned to Gregor. You say my reforms weaken the kingdom, but look at Wintermere. Before I restructured them, they were 43 wolves clinging to a dying territory. Now they're stable, growing, and actually functioning. You call that weakness? It's an exception, Gregor said. One pack. Then let's talk about the Redwater Stonefang dispute, Elara interrupted. Darian's original ruling would have created resentment and eventual rebellion. The compromise I suggested created peace. Lasting peace. Temporary peace, Gregor corrected, built on negotiation. And negotiation only works until it doesn't. And dominance only works until someone stronger comes along, Elara shot back. Your way creates a kingdom that depends entirely on the king being the most dangerous person in the room. What happens when he's not? What happens when he's cursed, or injured, or dead? Then a stronger king rises, Gregor said simply, through bloodshed, through war, through chaos. Elara stepped closer. My way creates a kingdom that doesn't fall apart the moment the leader does. It creates systems, structures, institutions that outlast any single wolf. It creates softness. It creates resilience, her voice rang through the chamber. And if you can't see the difference, then you're exactly the kind of leader this kingdom needs to move past. Gregor's eyes flashed with anger. You dare! I dare, Elara said, because I've already proven myself. I broke a curse that defeated every wolf who tried. I passed 3 trials designed to humiliate me. I restructured a pack that was on the verge of collapse. And I did it all without a wolf. She looked around the chamber. So tell me, what have you done that compares? What problems have you solved that I couldn't? What strength do you have that I lack? Silence. Gregor's jaw worked, but no words came out. I'm not asking you to abandon strength, Elara continued, her voice softer now. I'm asking you to expand your definition of it, to recognize that intelligence, strategy, empathy, these are strengths too. And if you refuse to see that, then you're not protecting the kingdom. You're limiting it. She paused, then addressed the entire chamber. Vote however you want. Demand that I step down if that's what you think is right. But know this. I'm not going anywhere. I'm the queen. I earned that title. And I'm going to keep earning it every single day, whether you like it or not. The chamber was utterly silent. Then, from the back, someone started clapping. Slowly at first. Then others joined in. Not everyone. Not even half. But enough. Torsten stood. I move that we table the vote of no confidence. The queen has made her case. Let her actions speak louder than our debate. Several council members nodded. Gregor looked around, clearly realizing he'd lost momentum. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "No," Elara agreed. "It's not. But neither am I." The vote was tabled. The coalition dissolved, for now, and Elara's position, while still precarious, was stronger than it had been. But the real victory came 3 days later. A messenger arrived from the Ashwood pack. Elara's family wanted to meet. Darian offered to come with her, but she declined. "This is something I need to do alone." She rode to the Ashwood territory with a small escort, her stomach twisting with a mix of nerves and anger. She hadn't seen her family since the night Darian took her away. Part of her wondered if they even remembered she existed. They met in the Great Hall, the same hall where she'd sung the moon song. Her father stood at the head of the table, looking older and more tired than she remembered. Garrett was beside him, his expression carefully neutral. Mira sat near the end, her eyes downcast. "Elara," her father said, "thank you for coming." She didn't sit. "What do you want?" He hesitated. "We've heard about what you've done. Breaking the curse, becoming queen, the reforms. And we wanted to—" He trailed off, clearly struggling. "We wanted to apologize." Elara stared at him. "Apologize?" "Yes." He looked genuinely uncomfortable. "We treated you poorly. We didn't see your value, and we were wrong." "You tried to humiliate me in front of the Alpha King," Elara said, her voice flat. "You told me to sing the moon song knowing I'd fail. You gave me a choice between performing or leaving forever." "I know." Her father's voice was quiet. "And I regret it." "Do you?" Elara stepped closer. "Or do you regret that it backfired? That instead of proving I was worthless, I ended up becoming queen?" Silence. Garrett shifted uncomfortably. Mira wouldn't meet her eyes. "You don't regret how you treated me," Elara continued. "You regret that you lost access to power. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You want to align with the queen because it benefits you." Her father opened his mouth, then closed it. Because she was right. And they both knew it. "I didn't come here for your apology," Elara said. "I came here to tell you that I don't need it. I don't need your approval, your acceptance, or your family. I built a life without you. I found people who see my worth, and I'm never going back to being the girl you tried to erase." She turned to leave. "Elara, wait," Mira said suddenly. Elara stopped. Mira stood, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry, really sorry. Not because you're queen now, but because I hurt you. I suggested the moon song because I thought it would be funny. I didn't think about how cruel it was. And I'm sorry." Elara looked at her sister, really looked at her. Mira's eyes were red, her expression genuine. It wasn't much, but it was something. "I forgive you," Elara said quietly. "But that doesn't mean I trust you. If you want to rebuild this, you'll have to earn it." Mira nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I will. I promise." Elara left the hall without looking back, and as she rode away from the Ashwood territory, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not anger, not pain, just closure. 6 months later, the kingdom had changed. Not completely, not overnight, but enough to notice. Packs across the territories had started adopting Elara's council system. Disputes were being resolved through mediation instead of violence. Wolves who'd left for other territories were starting to return, drawn by the promise of stability. And Elara, once the wolfless girl no one wanted, had become a symbol. Not of weakness, of resilience. She stood on the balcony of the palace one evening, looking out over the city, when Darian joined her. "Thinking about something?" he asked. "Everything," she admitted. "How different this is from where I started. How strange it feels to be here." "Do you regret it?" "No." She smiled. I keep waiting for someone to realize they made a mistake, that I don't actually belong here." "You do belong here." Darian put his arm around her. "You proved that 100 times over. To you, maybe. But there are still wolves who will never accept you," he finished. "I know. But there are more who do, and that number grows every day." She leaned into him. "Did you ever think it would turn out like this?" "No," he admitted. When I brought you here, I thought you'd survive a few nights and then leave. I didn't think you'd break a curse, restructure a kingdom, and turn into the most stubborn, brilliant, infuriating person I've ever met." Elara laughed. "Is that a compliment?" "It's the truth." He kissed the top of her head. "You changed everything, Elara. You changed me." "We changed each other," she corrected. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the kingdom they were rebuilding together. And when the stars came out, Elara thought about the girl she used to be, the one who hid in her room, who sang to empty cliffs, who believed she was nothing. That girl was gone. In her place was someone stronger, not because she'd gained a wolf or physical power, but because she'd learned that strength came in many forms. And the most powerful form of all was the courage to be exactly who you were, even when the world told you it wasn't enough. 1 year after breaking the curse, Elara stood before the full council and proposed her most ambitious reform yet: a constitutional system, a set of laws that would govern the kingdom not through the king's personal authority, but through established institutions, courts, councils, checks and balances that would protect wolves from tyranny and ensure that leadership was earned, not just taken. The debate lasted for months. Some wolves loved it, others hated it. A few tried to use it as an excuse to challenge Darien's authority, but in the end, the council voted to adopt it, not unanimously, but by enough of a margin to matter. And on the day the new constitution was signed, Elara stood beside Darien in the throne room as he addressed the kingdom. "For too long," Darien said, his voice carrying through the chamber, "we have ruled through strength alone. And while strength has its place, it is not enough to build a kingdom that lasts. Today, we take the first step toward something greater. A kingdom built not just on power, but on principles. Not just on dominance, but on justice." He turned to Elara. "And we have one person to thank for showing us the way." The room erupted in applause. Not everyone clapped, but most did. And as Elara looked out at the assembled wolves, some who'd fought her every step of the way, some who'd supported her from the beginning, all of them now bound by laws instead of fear, she felt something she'd never felt before: pride. Not in what she'd become, but in what she'd built. That night, alone in their chambers, Darien pulled Elara close. "Do you know what you've done?" he asked. "Built a bureaucracy," she teased. "Changed the world." He looked at her seriously. "A year ago, this kingdom was held together by fear. Now it's held together by law, by systems, by the belief that things can be better. We did that together." "No," he shook his head. "I enforced it, but you imagined it. You're the one who saw what this place could be." Elara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I just wanted to prove I wasn't worthless." "You're not." Darien's voice was fierce. "You never were, and now the whole kingdom knows it." She kissed him, slow and deep, and when they finally pulled apart, she smiled. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now?" Darien grinned. "Now we rule. Together, as equals. King and queen. Mind and heart," he corrected. "Logic and instinct. Perfectly balanced." And as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Elara realized something. She'd spent her whole life searching for a place to belong. And she'd finally found it. Not in a pack, not in a bloodline, but in herself. And in the man who'd seen her worth when no one else could. The girl who had once been nothing had become the force that changed everything, not through claws or fangs, but through courage, intelligence, and the radical belief that strength could look like something other than violence. She'd redefined power itself, and in doing so, she'd built a kingdom and a life that would last long after she was gone. In the end, Elara Voss proved that the greatest strength of all wasn't the ability to dominate. It was the courage to transform. And that more than any curse or crown was what made her a true queen.